On the ground in front of me, I have a collection of what I think are the best drivers on the market in 2022. Now, I've had the opportunity to hit 21 different models this year by 11 different brands. And in this video, we're going to break things up into 5 key sections in order to give you the best idea possible about what to expect from these drivers this year. And at the end of this video, I'll provide an overall verdict, so my views on what I think is the best driver of the year. Right, we're here at the London Club. Let's get started. Okay, so we're going to start with the looks of the drivers. And from the models that we've seen launched in 2022, I think it's fair to say that they've been subtly but neatly refined. And there is a trend here. There's a trend towards dialing back those crown views with darker matte black finishes and subtle alignment aids. And in the case of the TaylorMade Stealth, I think the club head does look probably a little bit more compact down behind the ball, but I love what they've done with this red carbon face. It highlights the loft and doesn't make the driver feel too hard to hit. But I do appreciate there will be players out there that want something a little bit bigger, a bit more generous down behind the ball. And if you fall into that category, then I think the Max version of Callaway's Rogue ST looks fantastic, as does the PXG 0211 and the Cleveland Launcher XL, and particularly I would say the Ping G425 Max looks really easy to hit as it's sat down behind the ball. But for me, if I was picking one driver for the way in which it looks, there is one model that I feel has raised the bar this year in terms of its aesthetics. I think it's very premium to look at. I think it's very exciting to look at. Got lovely shape as well, and that would be the TaylorMade Stealth. Okay, so we're talking here about recommended retail prices, and coming in at just under £400, I think the Cobra, Mizuno and Cleveland drivers all offer excellent value for money. They all performed really well, and they come in just a little bit less than you'll find at the top end of the market. And then you have the Wilson Launchpad, which comes in with a recommended retail price of £305, which I think is great value for money for a driver that looks really good and is also really easy to hit. But in this particular category, I thought there was one standout model. Now, earlier on this year, I tested the PXG 0211 and was really impressed by how easy it was to hit, how stable it was through the ball. I thought it looked good, I thought it felt good as well. And it comes in with a recommended retail price of just £205. And when you consider that you can get a sort of full, premium, good quality custom fitting for that club, I think that represents excellent value for money. Okay, so on to what is probably the most subjective part of this video in terms of the sound and the feel. And what we wanted to do was get some feedback from our audience about what they look for in terms of sound and feel from a driver. So we posted a poll on our Twitter feed asking golfers whether they prefer drivers that sound a little bit louder, are a bit higher pitched, and potentially as a result of that feel a little bit easier to launch and easier to hit, or whether they prefer drivers that sound a little bit more muted, a little bit lower pitched, and potentially as a result of that feel a bit more powerful. Because I feel as if those are the two ends of the spectrum that you're looking at. And as you can see, 2/3 of people went for option B there, so those lower pitched drivers. And so it wasn't for me a massive surprise to see in 2022 a bit of a trend towards more lower pitched, more powerful sounding drivers, but there are options at either end. So if you want something that feels that little bit easier to launch, easier to hit, then I think certainly Cleveland, Wilson and Ping definitely will provide that. If you're looking for something that feels powerful through impact, then TaylorMade, Callaway, Cobra all fit into that category, and I think the rest of them are sort of somewhere on the spectrum in between those 2 points. Now what I'm going to do now is hit 2 drives, one with the driver that I feel is the highest pitched driver, and then one of the lower pitched ones as well. I'm going to start with the Wilson Launchpad. Yeah, this driver just pops the ball up and away so easily. It has a really quite a loud impact sound and quite high pitch, which I know is something that a lot of golfers are really after. Now, at the other end of the spectrum, I'd say you've got drivers like the Cobra LTDx. And Cobra, for me, have really tuned down the acoustics of this driver for this year. Hopefully you can pick up on that. To me, it just sounds really powerful. I must admit, I do prefer drivers that fit into that mold of feeling really powerful through the ball. And there was one model, to me, that felt incredibly solid, shot after shot. And that's the one I'm about to hit now. Have a listen. Just feels really powerful through the ball, and that is the Callaway Rogue ST Max. Okay, so for the next two parts of this video, I'm going to focus on the performance of the drivers that I tested at King's Golf Studio on a TrackMan launch monitor using Titleist Pro V1X golf balls. I focused in this part of the test on the standard and low spin heads that best suit my game. Now, a few things to bear in mind. Firstly, unfortunately, we weren't able to get our hands on absolutely all of the models that would have fitted perfectly within this chart. We missed out on a few of those, so it's worth bearing that in mind. Secondly, not all of the drivers were set up exactly the same as each other. There were a few differences in terms of loft and shaft. I will list the setups below. And then the last thing to say is I'm a 3 handicap golfer, I'm not a pro, and I'm definitely not a robot. So you need to take this part of the video with a pinch of salt. But having had a look at that data, having seen the performance of the drivers in that environment, there are some important findings I think are worth talking about. Okay, so I'm going to start with consistency, and in particular, consistency of spin rates, because I think it's been a big area of improvement across the board over the last couple of years. So I think drivers from a few years ago, you'd hit shots, maybe like high toe or low heel, that would either spin up too much and balloon into the air, or they wouldn't spin enough and they'd kind of nosedive out of the air. Whereas I think for this year, hitting shot after shot, it felt like those variations in strike didn't create big variations in ball flight. I noticed it from what I was seeing from the shots that I hit, and I also noticed it in the data across the board, as I said. But there were a few drivers that stood out. I think the Titleist TSI-3 provided impressive consistency of ball flight, and then distance as well was very good. The Honma really felt incredibly stable through the ball. But there was one driver that just pipped this area of our testing, and that's because when I looked at the spin rates of all the different shots that I hit on the launch monitor, there was a variation of just 101 RPM. That's incredibly tight. So for me, the driver that I would pick for consistency would be the Ping G425 Max. Okay, so on to distance. And I think it's fair to say, before I tell you how I got on, that if you have a driver that's maybe only, I don't know, a couple of years old, and you were well fitted for that driver, any gains that you see from the 2022 drivers are likely to be fairly marginal. But if your driver is a bit older, or if you weren't particularly well fitted, then I think there are some tangible improvements that you can find in terms of your distance out on the golf course. Now, for me, during my testing, I was really impressed across the board by how long they were. There was really not much to choose from between all the drivers that I hit. And in particular, I was impressed by how consistently long they were. But there was one driver that offered me just a fraction more. I had a ball speed of 169.6, a carry distance of 286, and a total distance of 316, which is long for me. And that driver was the Cobra LTDx LS. Okay, so on to the all-important final verdict. And I think having hit so many good drivers this year, picking just one model is very, very difficult, but I am going to. But before I do that, I would say that if there is one particular brand that you're interested in, for whatever reason, then they will almost certainly have a model that will suit your game. But for me, there was one driver that I felt performed consistently well across all the different categories we looked at, and that was this one, the Cobra LTDx. I think it looks fantastic. It's got a really premium look to it. It feels great. It's got a really sort of slightly muted, low pitch sound through impact that sounds powerful. It also produced great distance and forgiveness, and it comes in at a price that I think is really good as well. So as an all-rounder, I'd go for the LTDx from Cobra. I'd go for the standard model that spins just a fraction more, because I felt like this was a little bit more playable for me out on the golf course. But there are so many subjective factors that you'll need to bear in mind if you're going through the process of finding a new driver in 2022. If you are, I hope this video has been helpful. Please do hit the like button if you've enjoyed the video. But that's it now from the London Club. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.